I want to switch now to our next panel. And I think this is important in the context of the tribal programs, right? The panel focuses on an alliance for Indigenous Prosperity that we organized, or we helped organize with Kevin Allis and some other members. And it's really as a reaction to some of the executive orders that we've seen that challenge these programs. And so, and Kevin can talk to this, and Jerrod can talk to this. I do want to give each of these gentlemen a couple of minutes or a minute just for a quick introduction on your background, because I think it's important that the audience understands sort of your background, right? Kevin, you bring years and years of experience from the tribal community, supporting the tribal community, advocating for the tribal community. Jerrod, you bring years and years of experience working in the tribal community and growing some of these businesses. So maybe a quick intro, and then I have some questions for you guys about the EOs, what we feel is happening. Kevin, you've seen some stuff in the administration, you've seen some stuff on the Hill, maybe get your background on that. And then Jerrod, sort of on the ground level, what are the impacts that we're seeing? What are the fears that we're hearing? What are some actual things that we've seen as far as maybe T4Cs, et cetera? And what is sort of the longer term outlook from the tribal perspective? But let me start with Kevin. Do you have a mic? Oh, if you can, I'll give you my mic. If you can start real quick just on a little background on yourself, and then Jerrod, and then I have some questions. But I do really want to ask the audience to participate as well. But I have some canned questions, and more than happy to ask those questions, but I think the audience will have some good questions as well. I think it's on.
Awesome. Good. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much for attending. John, thanks for having me. I recognize some of the faces here. My name's Kevin Allis. I'm a tribal member of the Forest County Potawatomi community in Wisconsin. And I've been very involved with my community ever since I was a young boy. It comes from my mother's side of the family. She was born and raised on a reservation in northern Wisconsin. I served as our board chairman of our Business Development Corporation and started our federal contracting arm. It's now Potawatomi Ventures. Greg Colleen runs that. We have 14 small businesses operating in the federal space. I'm also a former attorney at Palero Mazza. I was there for almost 6 years. I'm also the former CEO of the National Congress of American Indians. Served that right before actually Trump 1.0 and into the pandemic. And then about a decade ago, where I met a lot of these folks, I was the executive director of the Native American Contractors Association, which looked a little different than it does today. But and then in between that, I have my own government relations and communications firm working with tribes and tribal organizations across the country on whatever they find important. I live a lot on the Hill and over in the administration, especially a lot lately, dealing with tribal issues.
Jerrod? Yeah. Jerrod Mallinger. There it is. I've been involved in government contracting virtually my whole career, and a lot of that has been spent in entity-owned 8A, supporting tribes, Native American tribes, especially in rural areas, because there's a huge need, and there's not a lot in very, very remote areas of the country. We find these groups that there's not a lot of opportunities for economic development. Gaming is not an option when you get a certain distance out, and so it's been really rewarding to help and provide a new source of income for tribes. I think what's universal among rural tribes is that they always have programs that go unfunded. And so the more that they can have an additional source of revenue and income, that's really helpful. I've been involved in over half a dozen startups from scratch that have been taken to 20, 30, 40 million a year in a very short period of time. The last 18 years, really everything from program management to executive management and executive consulting in that space. And so my focus is really, how can we continue to develop these programs? How can we continue to bring expertise to rural tribes especially?
Thank you, guys. So the Alliance, Kevin, you and I had a conversation early on in the Trump days, and we saw sort of some of the tea leaves, and we saw some of the executive orders, and that sort of has compiled. Like I said earlier, it's like you kind of forget what you're supposed to be mad at because there's a new executive order out every day. But maybe, Kevin, and we spoke about this at the Reservation Economics Summit, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the executive orders, sort of what do they mean? Like it's almost like reading, like I said, reading tea leaves, right? Because they don't just come out and say something. It's intertwined inside the EOs. So can you talk a little bit about the EOs and sort of how you see it and why you feel that might be a challenge to the tribal community?
Yeah, great, John. And let me just say I'm not surprised, okay? Like I said, I ran NCAI during Trump 1.0, okay? And those of you who don't know NCAI, it's the largest and oldest and most powerful American Indian advocacy organization in the country, been around 80 years.
Just real quick, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see, how many tribal members, tribal entities, tribal organizations do we have here? Awesome. Okay.
And I dealt directly with Interior and at the time Assistant Secretary Tara Sweeney and folks over at the SBA on a regular basis and had a very difficult time. And so, when I see these EOs come out in 2.0, not terribly surprised. Now, to John's point, there are a bunch of them, okay, that cause us to not sleep at night. John calls them little fires here and there. Folks, I think it's a bonfire, okay? And at the end of the day, all this is causing me, to go right to my bourbon collection at home or, go get my airplane, pull it out and go fly and disappear from the world for a little bit because it's very stressful. You have the executive order, let's focus one on DEI, anti-DEI, and taking down anything that has to do with DEI. And tribes, tribes are impacted by this, okay, in a negative way and not a constructive way. And what's really important, which I've talked to officials both in this administration, the previous go around, and also on the Hill, is let's not conflate tribal programs and the relationship that tribes have with the federal government with DEI. They ain't DEI, okay? And it's been a very large rock to push uphill so far because there's a lot of folks that just don't understand the long-term history between sovereign tribal nations and the federal government. They don't, it's amazing. They don't understand that, yes, Indian tribes are a minority in this country. But I hate to say this, they're not a racial minority. They're not a racial minority. Tribes have a political relationship with this federal government. You would never, we're sovereign governments that have citizens, tribal citizens. You would never consider the citizens of France or Canada or Mexico or Japan to be a racial group. They're not, okay? And tribes don't. And they also have a relationship with the federal government through treaties and a trust responsibility that has nothing to do with DEI, all right? And it has everything to do with, great towns like this and cities that you may be coming from. We gave that land to, the federal government so it could be grown into what we see today, and we moved to different areas that aren't so welcome. All right, so there's a deal there. There's agreements that the Supreme Court still honors and recognizes today that this country owes. So when we talk about attacking programs that benefit minorities, okay, because that's what this is. Yes, puts tribes in a very difficult, weird spot, okay? Our programs, and I have to say our programs, tribal programs, are not in that same space. And it is really, working hard to make people understand that. And then you have, so that's an EO that directly, is a threat to tribal sovereignty and the well-being of tribal communities in a very unique way. Okay, some of the others on consolidating contracting over at the GSA, repealing an executive order that was very important in the last administration, 14112, which the Biden administration, and which wasn't just some kind of feel-good executive order. The OMB, the White House Council, Domestic Advisory Policy Council, they got together and started working on how funding and how the administration of funding for tribes could be easier, more streamlined, and more effective to make it both good on both the government side and the tribal side. That was thrown in the trash can about a month ago. And then you even have the Birthright Citizen EO, which on its face you wouldn't think would be a threat to Indian country, but in the federal court, when DOJ was making the argument on supporting that EO and trying to convince the court that it wasn't illegal, they drew on a case, Elks v. Wilkins, from the late 1800s that was a totally American Indian case about an American Indian that was denied citizenship to this country because he was more loyal to the tribal sovereign than the United States. Now, you put all that stuff together, that is some really scary stuff, okay? I mean, let's work that backwards. I'm very loyal to my tribal government. I'm very loyal to my tribal community. Are you reviving that argument and saying because I'm loyal to this sovereign that's not the United States, that I'm less of a citizen, or maybe not even a citizen? How does that weave in with these other things on how they think about tribal participation in federal contracting, tribal participation in funding mechanisms across the country? So a lot of these executive orders, and there's several more, but we could be here for weeks talking about all these executive orders. All these together paint a picture that for tribal leaders across the country is not that bright. Very alarming, very concerning, because we are a sovereign within a sovereign. There's a whole other thing that, we could be damaged long term if this trajectory continues on the way that we see it. So we have to take it as a worst case scenario and do everything we can to protect what an Indian tribe is and what it's not, and all the things that flow out underneath our tribal government and flow within our communities to continue to try to make us stronger and more relevant.
Thank you. And I know there's questions in the audience. Jerrod, can you maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as sort of the federal contracting community? And I know you were taking notes down, but feel free to throw in the thoughts you have with respect to what Kevin just laid out. But in particular, sort of the impact that we're seeing in the federal contracting side, and sort of what the perspective is from tribal entities and the concerns, but also what the outlook is. Or at least, like we talked today, it's hard to say what the outlook is, but how do they view the outlook moving forward?
Yeah, so the key word of the week is probably going to be uncertainty, right? That is the overarching theme that has plagued us the last 90 days. And there's two ways to look at that. And there certainly is a lot of major concerns, and there's a lot of fear that's out there in the marketplace. Among the tribes specifically, I think that the focus needs to be on tribal business specifically, I should clarify, is really to focus on mission critical. Because our clients that are working on infrastructure projects, that are working on projects that are key to the mission of the government, are not struggling, right? Those contracts aren't being canceled. There are, and if you're in an industry of consulting, like I heard, they list out on TV, they read all the contracts that they canceled, right? And I was really surprised to hear that there was a focus on canceling certain consulting contracts, almost like, consulting for the government was bad. And I can tell you that there's a lot of efficiency that comes through consulting, and certainly there's potentially waste, fraud, and abuse, but you can't view all consulting as bad. And so when I heard that, and we talked about it in the business sense, it's like, okay, if consulting is under a spotlight right now as being potentially a contract that could be canceled, you really might have to pivot if you're focused specifically in that sector to make sure that your contracts are protected. Like John talked about earlier, there is things that can be done. There is things from a contractual perspective that can be done, but you also want to really consider about, okay, how do we prove our worth? How do we prove our value to the government in this so that those don't get canceled? I think that as we continue to progress through the end of the fiscal year, a lot of these things are going to pan themselves out, in one way or another. We're finding out
Good or
more
bad?
and more. Yeah, we're finding out more and more every day, and I think that in essence, we need to view this room, the ecosystem that's here, as a shelter from that storm, right? Working together, how do we form new partnerships? How do we expand our capabilities? And how do we make sure that, we're positioning ourselves well for the future?
So before I have some questions, but yes, sir. You have a question back there?
Yes.
Hello, sir.
This is Ronald Drawn with SCM. I was very interested to learn more, if you would elaborate on what that executive order, I missed the numbers for it, but would you tell us more about what that executive order did, or maybe the top 3 executive orders that we're concerned about that we should be knowledgeable of?
Yeah, you're referring to the executive order under the Biden administration that was thrown in the trash can?
I think that one and the DEI executive order.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what it was?
There's 2 of them.
Yeah.
At least 2.
Yeah, you marry them. So Executive Order 14112 was came into being late in the Biden administration, and it was a reaffirmation of the federal government figuring out ways to strengthen its relationship with Indian country and to strengthen tribal sovereignty through looking at shortfalls in funding, the administration of funding, and also making sure that there's regular dialogue through and honoring treaty and trust responsibilities and that sovereignty through active consultation with tribes throughout any kind of rulemaking process or anything that impacted tribal interests. And for those of us that operate in Indian country and I already heard it, we are underfunded. That treaty and trust responsibility is woefully underfunded. Yeah. And the government knows that. Okay, there have been a couple reports that have come out in the last 20 years that speak to the underfunding and what in many of those line items in those areas, what the funding level should be to be acceptable. And so that executive order reinvigorated the internal conversation within the executive branch to look at how they could deliver services and that responsibility better and more efficiently to tribes. Okay?
And that was an executive order under Biden, which was rescinded under Trump too.
Rescinded on March 14, 2025, thrown in the trash can. So immediately the reach out to folks that may be sitting in an office over at the White House Council or anywhere else is, okay, what's the plan here? Right? I mean, now you're throwing this in the trash. Do you have a better idea? Is there another one coming? Or is this conflating your anti-DEI agenda with tribal programs and the tribal relationship with the federal government? Is that part of it? And I haven't gotten an answer, but my sense is that it's part of that, because of what I said back before. There aren't enough people, a lot of young folks up there, in these positions that really understand the history of tribal nations and the federal government and exactly what the essence of that relationship is.
I believe we have
I
a
don't know if
follow-up
that
question.
helped, yeah.
Yeah, we have a follow. You touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear more about how we can reach out to the administration to address the issues of underfunding and opportunity.
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually think that the better approach, okay, at this point, seeing what I've seen so far in the first 100 days, I guess we're 101 or 2 days now, I don't know, that the better approach is to go to the Hill, all right? Now, Congress has been silent, okay, really, for this particular, during the first, 3 months of this administration. And they admit it. I've spent the last couple of weeks on the Hill talking about some federal contracting issues and other things, and they admit that they've been a little quiet, but they do recognize that at some point they have to do something and step in. And I think that looking at where the executive branch is taking us, okay, and I say us in the collective sense about the things that are causing us not to sleep very well, we really need to make sure other branches have our back, if that makes any sense. We have to make sure Congress, at the end of the day, has our back when it comes to where this administration wants to maybe go with some of these things. And we have to continue to be in their face, eye to eye with them, talking to them, and not always by ourselves, but also other partners, as I heard in the conversation.
And maybe with AIP.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? Is that's exactly why the Alliance for Indigenous Prosperity was created, because it's not expected that everybody would know how to take that to the Hill. How do we get Congress involved to that degree? And really, this group and backgrounds like people like John here have spent much of their career, understanding that process, and Alan too, just understanding that process. And so the more that we can come together as a group, and we don't think just because it says the Alliance for Indigenous Prosperity, that doesn't mean that every small business that touches, the 8A program or any of the socioeconomic programs through the 8A shouldn't be engaged in thinking about ways that you can influence Conference and the Hill and utilize this function.
Any other questions?
And John, if you don't mind,
please,
to that point, and getting together in person and strategizing and together walking up to the Hill and having dozens and dozens of meetings is
Rather
so
than
powerful.
letters.
Yeah, I'm going to say it. I hate letters, okay? Hate them, all right? Letter writing campaigns are trash. And right now, all the big Native organizations, they're all, sign on to this letter, sign on to that letter, to this secretary, to this administrator, to this president, to this. They aren't reading that crap. They aren't. Okay? And then it's just checking a box saying we did something. They aren't doing jack. Okay? They need to get their tribal members and their members, their tribal leaders, their tribal business leaders together, like AIP wants to do and plans to do and will do, and get in front of people face to face on a regular basis and hold them accountable, because a damn letter is a waste of paper and a waste of ink and won't accomplish anything.
There's a question right there.
Good morning. This question kind of goes back to Jerrod had mentioned consulting. Our company, we have consulting in the name, Polaris Consulting Group. Our CEO was speaking with his mentor, and his mentor said, hey, listen, I have good knowledge that companies or the word consulting will be banned. So basically the mentor was saying, we recommend that you take consulting out of your company's name. Has any of the panel members, including you, John, heard anything to that effect?
So not specifically, right? So not to that degree, right? And I think it's interesting, because one of the things that I was also going to mention this morning isn't just like when you walk in the door, what value do I bring, right? As opposed to serving the underserved community, and those are all important. That doesn't resonate right now. But there's certain key words, I would say, that you either want to use or stay away from. And certainly, we have clients that are professional services, and that has been hit hard, right? Obviously, USAID is decimated, but even professional services. And to the extent that we have some clients where their statement of work is executive coaching, nothing about DEI, nothing about diversity, but those have been impacted. So to the extent that you can reframe, it's almost like they're looking at what is the thing that you're selling us. And if you cannot describe the thing that you're selling, then they're like, we don't need it. It's like, if it's touchy-feely, efficiency, organizational restructuring, whatever. It's like, what is the thing that we get for this money? And you got to be able to describe and value that thing the federal government gets. And professional services, unfortunately, it's one of the things is just, and they're attacking the Big Ten, right? I mean, if you look at the largest 10 consulting firms, they were required to submit justification for why they exist and why the government is buying from them, and how are they going to reduce their costs. And if they didn't come to the table with cost reductions, that was considered non-responsive. And I think I saw, and Trevor may confirm this, or Joe, I think I saw a response from OMB that said they thought, and I'm quoting, I'm not being coy, if that's the right term. The response was, is this cost saving a joke? Like, you guys aren't serious about this reduction, right? Because this sounds like a joke. Like, you got to go back to the drawing board. And so it's that environment, I think, that's challenging. It's like, and this is why it goes back to justifying your contract. Like, be thinking about it and be working with your buyer. Like, what is the thing that you're selling, and how does it add value to the government? Because is it something they can touch? Is it something that was manufactured or created in the U.S.? Is there IP around it? Is it create something of value to the government? And if you can't justify that, those are the things that are being challenged. So to the extent that marketing becomes a part of that, I would argue yes, probably. But I don't know that I would change my name, but definitely marketing and how you approach an agency. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, along those same lines, I actually lost my thought there, but go ahead.
While you're getting your thought, Jerrod, it's definitely something you should be thinking about and just figuring out how you navigate, right? I mean, to what John said earlier, look, when you can hear I'm a homer, when the Baltimore Ravens take the field every Sunday, it's a different team, okay? And they've got to prepare differently for every single game. And what Lamar does on any given Sunday against one team might look different the next team, okay? And that's where we are right now.
So you guys can probably figure that
Yeah,
Kevin lives closer to Baltimore than to
Baltimore
DC,
boy.
right?
I live in Baltimore, former Baltimore City cop, all that stuff. So anyway, I formed an organization, and I just use this as an example to your point, to your question. I formed this organization in late fall that's really catching a lot of steam right now called Native American Aviation Association. It's a workforce development to connect Indian country to the aviation industry that doesn't exist. We applied for 2 grants over at the FAA, okay, that were part of the FAA 2018 FAA reauthorization bill. Workforce development grants, which in the legislation says that 30% of it are supposed to go to minority businesses or underserved, underrepresented communities. But guess what? In the proposal, you better not refer to underrepresented communities and all that. You can't, or it's going to go right in the trash can, even though this is just a workforce development program to put pilots in seats and aircraft mechanics in shops, okay? So that's the context of the times right now, and you and your team will navigate what the proper way to go, but it's different, it is different, and what you put on paper and marketing matters.
Yeah. What I was going to say is the government knows right now, and I think this whole process that they're going through with DOGE, the government knows that they're going to tear too far. They're going to reduce too far, and that's part of the strategy, right? It's like take it down to the bare bones and have a period of pain and find out what's really needed, and then build it back up where it's needed. And so I wouldn't necessarily change my whole corporate strategy over what's happened right now, but definitely keep your pulse on what happens over the next 90 days.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one in the back. What happened to Jake? Oh, there's one back there.
Uh-oh.
One up front here too.
The RIF, the reduction, all that sort of thing, the DOGE. But I'd like to put an optimistic word out. I think there's going to be great opportunity because the government is reducing its in-house workforce, and there's opportunity for the past performance you've built in your companies to offer your services, consulting and otherwise, on how to fill their manpower shortage that it's going to result in some of these offices, in some of these industries, in all areas of work that, I met a lot of people so far, and I'm hoping to meet more here at the meeting that do a variety of service, and they have tremendous capability and potential that I think the government's going to be looking for, and I think that's something we need to push into a narrative that we present.
Thank you. Agree. I mean, like I was sort of alluding to this morning, every challenge creates an opportunity, right? And so it's trying to figure out where the gaps are. And if they are riffing a ton of people, and by the way, the other day I was talking to someone that is in the federal marketplace in acquisition planning and execution, and efficiency in acquisition planning and execution. And that certainly is probably an area that the federal government wants to get better at, right? Any other questions?
Jake, there's a question up here.
Sorry, it was similar to his. I was
Oh.
going to ask the panelists what they see as.
Yeah. So I don't know if in addition to that, you guys have comments about what you see, right? It's hard to read the tea leaves. So the point is, and I think that's a great point, with all the rifts and the reductions, and what we talked about earlier this morning, the government is going to keep buying, right? They can't stop buying. The federal government is the largest buyer in the entire world, right? Not just the U.S., in the entire world. They're going to have to keep buying. What are they going to buy? How are they going to buy it? It's reading those tea leaves and staying in front of it, and really creating the teams that help you become competitive in this environment. I do have a question. Do you have another comment to that?
I was just going to say, government contractors are notorious for being able to meet all the details, right? The government has loads and loads of bureaucracy that we have to deal with every day. All these little fires that you talk about are just another, in essence, another piece of that puzzle. We're going to get through that. We're going to adapt, and we're going to continue to, put out these fires and meet the executive orders, and those that are able to wade through this time. I agree with the gentleman in the back. There's a huge opportunity there. This is going to, this is not only going to make the government more efficient, but it's going to thresh out, some of the companies that haven't really thought about their strategy and how they're going to, make themselves more efficient.
Yep. So we have like 3 minutes. There's one thing I want to just get to, because people have alluded to this. It sort of ties to the comment in the back. Kevin, you alluded to this, but sort of as closing remarks for the both of you. And this was a question from before, but if you can frame this, right? We've seen a lot of people being ripped or being left or having left government, right? And Kevin, you talked about this at Res. These are people that understand the historical nature of these programs. Like if I'm 28 years old and I walk into the door at the SBA, I'm going, and I work for Doge, I'm going, wait a second, this isn't super competitive, and if I compare prices, this doesn't make sense. Let's get rid of all this stuff. And this is actually a barrier, but there is a historical context to these programs. There is statutory requirements with respect to economic development as part of the Small Business Act. And so we're in an environment where that historical foundational knowledge is disappearing at the White House, on the Hill, in the agencies. So how do you, what are the things that we can do to sort of react to that? Number one, what are the challenges, right? So describing the challenges I might have just now, but then how do we react to that? And then Jerrod, if you have any last comments as well. But Kevin, you go first.
What I believe, and this is just according to Kevin, is that these people that are now missing, that had this historical context, that knew, had the relationships, that knew what the story is and could deliver for Indian country, they're gone. Going to the administration and the executive branch right now and asking them to hire them back, ain't gonna happen, okay? They're not gonna bring them back, okay? So again, focusing on the Hill, okay, which we've done extensively the last couple of weeks around federal contracting, around DEI, and around tribal programs is, and I'll tell you the good news real quick, John, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Congress gets it on both sides of the aisle. We had some very good meetings, in depth, put them on the spot, whether they Republicans or Democrats, and the Republicans agreed that they didn't really agree with some of the stuff that the administration was doing, and that someday they'll get involved, and they appreciate us coming in. So I felt comfortable, we really did, after a couple weeks and hundreds of meetings, that there's something there. And it's asking legislation to include language that reaffirms this and forces the administration, whether this one or a future one, to honor those treaty and trust responsibilities. It's going to because the folks over at the White House aren't going to hire these people back. Okay, and we're going to need one of the other branches to flex its muscles and bring the third one in line, if that makes sense.
Jerrod, any closing comments?
I think we hear it all the time, right? That small business is the backbone of the economy, and in the federal space, there's not only an advantage for small business through these programs, but there's an advantage for the government. These programs are needed. There's times when the government needs to purchase quickly or move quickly, and small business is really the best vehicle to be able to do that. And so I guess my thought would be, yeah, you know, in the early 2000s, we saw a big change in the 8A program and the way it was structured, and there was a lot of cuts, and you know, we went through a tumultuous time. That's what we're doing again. You know, at the end of the day, we used the AIP to really have a better vehicle to stand up and, you know, shout from the mountaintops why this is important to keep in place. And I think that's, you know, the key takeaway here is that, you know, they're writing letters may have some effect, but this is a much better way, right? This is a much better way. And so that's all I do.
Yeah, and just to finish up, just to piggyback off of that and something that I said, the Hill recognizes the power and need to have small business and federal contracting. Okay, they got, you know, when we were talking about the consolidation at GSA and how that threatens sole source awards, which is an efficient way to push out, you know, something from an agency to maintain contracting shops in the agencies where the relationship exists between the contractor and those COs, and that the agency can move quickly if it needs to in order to get something done with these small businesses, and that GSA, those contracting officers have no relationship to the mission of the agency. They don't know what's going on. They're just looking at bottom line dollars. That can't be too efficient. That's not, the Hill gets that, okay? So we need, you know, we need everybody to help with AIP and tribes to get involved so we can continue to thumb Congress and you know, they acknowledge that and push them and push them and push them to make sure that it doesn't go off the brink and all this is protected. Tribal small business, non-tribal small business in federal contracting is in a safe space, because although it may not look like the administration understands that, in our meetings with Congress over the last month and a half, they do. They just need to get it in action, and the more we bug them, the more we knock on their doors, the better chance we have of making sure that works.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Our time is up. I appreciate you guys. Can we hear it for the panel? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.